All right. Well, here we go. All right. So I have the privilege of being joined by Eliot Brown, the author of a book I couldn't possibly recommend anymore, a co-author, my mistake, The Cult of We, with Maureen Farrell. Eliot is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, as is Maureen, covering a story that I think a lot of us are familiar with at a high level, but this book just does an incredible job, not only of getting into some of the behind the curtain stories of what happened with WeWork, but, and this is why I'm such a big fan of it, Elliot, is what enabled what happened with WeWork, and the environment and the market that allowed the story. We if we don't know, there's going to be a mini series, I guess, with Anne Hathaway and Jared Leto coming out soon. To also shed some light on what happened with WeWork. So I'll just flip the introduction, flip a question to you to kind of get us going, and that is, tell me about what you learned about WeWork in reporting for this book, and what did enable this story to happen, where you had so much private capital invested in this company, but really this one person who took a lot of this money and, among other things, took private jets where he was smoking marijuana before critical business meetings.
Yeah, I think, when you sort of step back, one of the things that's like, I covered WeWork for years and covered venture capital. And so one of the things, if you sort of step away from that and look at it, it's like, I'm sorry. So this relatively not that valuable real estate company was built by a guy who sold it as a tech company to people and raised more money than any other startup in the world or in the country, except for Uber. And then it all, crashed in value by $40 billion. So it's not, it's not very intuitive. So basically, I think what was going on is the short answer is there was too much money in Silicon Valley chasing too few ideas. And there's sort of reasons for that. And you can sort of pull back more and look at macro environment stuff like federal monetary policy, but we can talk about it if you want. But like the general answer that I like to stick to is that in Silicon Valley, you had this real explosion of interest in the 2010s, where people saw how much money everyone was making off of Facebook. Banks were not hot anymore. Housing wasn't hot, and it's like, well, where are we going to put our money? And so then everyone sort of rushed into Silicon Valley, where like they're selling these sort of dreams of like, we're all going to build these companies that are going to disrupt other companies and the value is going to go up to here. And so then everyone's trying to replicate that. And that's an environment that sort of lends itself to people doing wacky things. And then WeWork sort of took that general potential for wackiness and, threw some white gas on it.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a three-part follow-up. Number one is, would this story of WeWork have been possible without federal policy that you discussed? If the answer is no, are there other WeWorks out there right now? Because we do have so much liquidity in the market. And then the third question is, what happens when the Fed starts taking their foot off the gas and tapering and raising interest rates?
Yeah, so it's sort of hard to prove a hypothetical like that. But when I've done sort of these, like pulling back or following the snake to its tail, or from the tail to the head, to figure out where the money's coming from, people say something similar. So venture capitalists invest in startups. Where do venture capitalists get their money? They get it from endowments, and they get it from wealthy people and others who sort of want to spend something other than the stock market. And then those investment managers will often say things like, look, it's a crazy world out there. I know everything's overvalued, but my job is to get a 7% return every year on average. And I can't do that by not spending money. So that's a long way of saying it really does seem to be motivated by this low interest rate world, which is enabled by the Fed. To your second question, yes, there are other WeWorks out there. Now, the question is, how much of WeWork being so WeWorky and becoming the country's most valuable startup but it was all just this paper mache empire. How much of that was due to like Adam Neumann, the CEO, being a particularly crazy person and finding also a particularly crazy funder in SoftBank. I think there was a fair amount of that. Like you may just not get individuals just as sort of primed to have this Icarus-like rise and fall in the future. But yeah, I mean, like it's a system in venture capital where what they do is they continue to look for these founders that promise a really big vision. They look for people who have like are really good salesmen because they know that you need to convince customers, you need to convince other funders, crucially. And so the way you do that as an early investor is you look for somebody who's just a good salesman. And then, you know, like these investors are largely ceding control to founders. So it's these 20-something, 30-something people who often have no real experience, but there's so much demand for the hot startups that they get to actually have full control over a company, even if they only own 10%, 20%. And so that's a real kind of dangerous recipe where it's going to lead, like it's impossible to see how it's not going to lead to more of these people realizing how easy it is to sort of just like promise this crazy thing in the future. And yeah, we're almost there. Like just get on the rocket ship. And you know, some of those people are going to be off.
Yeah. So let me ask for, you know, your is to the ground in Silicon Valley and the street, I'm sure. Let me ask you this. You know, Larry Summers has been wrong a few times. And of course, personality is perhaps leaves a few people a bit on their heels. But listen, when he says that the environment we're entering into, you know, with so much speculation and, you know, meme stocks and Robinhood is the scariest he's ever witnessed. That to me is alarming.
He has been Treasury Secretary twice. He's not just dude.
You know, what is your general sense, and what is the sense of others about how this all ends?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a good thing to note is that I've wondered some of those things and haven't said them, so certainly not publicly or you know, definitively, but like it seemed to me that they were very bubbly for years. And so if you'd listened to me or taken my sort of alarmism 5 years ago and made investment decisions based on that, that would have been a terrible decision. So I was right about WeWork. I don't know what else I've been right about. And so I think, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea how it ends. You can take the nihilistic view and just say, well, everything's just going to get more and more insane. And when you have a car company that produces like a fifth of the cars of Ford, but is worth 20 times Ford, you know, 30 times, 15 times Ford, then like maybe something's weird in the world. But I don't know, like things have gotten kind of crazy to the point where I kind of just throw my hands up in the air.
Yeah. So let me ask you, taking a little bit closer lens at WeWork, talk to me about a startup culture. It strikes me that the true genius of WeWork, in reading your book, Your Marine's Work, was actually the slogan or the rallying cry, whatever you want to call it, that was emblazoned on the walls of WeWork. Do what you love, which you report, I believe, that was the creation not of Adam Neumann, but of Rebecca Neumann. And you know, what that tapped into at an emotional level of folks looking for something that looking for work that was more fulfilling than what they were engaged in at the moment, and WeWork's ability to tap into that desire for more rewarding work. And it strikes me that is not something that was unique necessarily to WeWork, that desire for more rewarding work, but ultimately that it was not sustainable. Is this something, this startup culture that WeWork created a platform for, something you see as running into a dead end of reality, or will we see it continuing into the next decade?
I think it depends how you sort of look at that point. I mean, one way to look at it is they were essentially just riffing off of, intentionally or not, riffing off of the large tech companies at the time. So Google's earlier, they've probably gotten rid of it by this time, but Google's earlier motto was "Don't do evil, don't be evil," and Facebook was and still largely is at the upper executive ranks, convinced that they are like out there doing good for the world, making the world a better place through connections. So I think that sort of like at the broadest level of the mission driven side of things, I think it continues to be incredibly pervasive in Silicon Valley. Maybe that's just the thing that works for millennials to sort of trick them that way. And nobody realizes, wow, everyone's company seems to be mission driven. And the ones that say they're the most mission driven also pay the most. Like, what are the chances? So I think that's broad, and I don't really know what happens when everybody realizes that their ad tech company isn't actually making the world a better place. In terms of like the WeWork notion of actually having businesses together in one community and therefore making all these connections and having this symbiosis and cross-pollination, I think that was pretty short-lived. I think that basically that worked early on for WeWork to get demand, and like it was sort of working. If you talk to the people there, they really did form a lot of friends and do businesses, but it's just like that can't really scale. I mean, how deep is that? And if it can scale, WeWork didn't do it well, nor did others. So I don't really see that as as someone who actually likes the office and likes the idea of interactions. That's a hard one to do at a big scale. Like you can have loci of journalists are all going to be here, and then eventually some of them are going to get to know each other. But to have a 500,000 person customer business, I don't know how you would really do that smartly.
Yeah. So last question, and you kind of touched upon it. What now for WeWork? What now for working spaces? For open floor working spaces. In Chicago, we have, you may be familiar, 1871, which is an open floor working space in the Merchandise Mart building. They have something similar in DC, 1776. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Every city has these kind of flagship open floor working spaces. It was something that became popular in the last decade. Now, after COVID, they offer flexible work environments, but at the same time, are we necessarily going to be going back into the office in the kind of volumes that we were before COVID? Is this something that I'm sure that they are, that the folks at WeWork and the company, of course, still is around in spite of all the trouble they ran into. Is this something they're monitoring? What, in your judgment, is the future of these kind of tech theme open working spaces?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so caught in this question of how is society going to adapt to the sort of endemic stage of the pandemic. I mean, my personal view is a not science reporter, but someone who reads these stories is, it's pretty clear this thing's not going away. And the question is, are we going to be afraid of breakthrough cases as sort of a society, or are we not? And if we are, I don't really personally see how you can mandate anyone to go to the work, even if it's one day a week. Because who wants to sort of go to an office without a mask if you can basically do the same thing from home? Personally, I think there's a huge amount of benefits to going to the office, but I'm pretty bearish, just as a speculative guesser of what's going to go on. But for WeWork, I think my opinion aside, I think it's just completely caught up in this question of COVID. And so if we do go back, if we sort of aren't, once kids get vaccinated, if people actually do show a willingness and desire to go back to the office, then I think, you could at least have some form of that. WeWork actually didn't have that much open floor. A lot of it was carved up into offices. But if you're a company and especially a 10-person company, a 5-person company, and you really don't know what the future is, why would you sign like a long-term lease? Like it does seem to have a fair amount of appeal, even if you have to pay more on a yearly basis to get one of these arbitrage leases, essentially.
Sure. Eliot, thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording. 1 second.